It was a crisp Saturday morning in late March, the kind where the sun peeked through the curtains just enough to nudge you out of bed. I'd been up for maybe an hour sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone when the text came in. My boss, well, former boss now, sent me a message that hit like a sucker punch to the gut. After 20 years of grinding it out for him, building his company from a shaky startup to a regional powerhouse, he fired me, over text, on a weekend. The message was cold, clinical, and about as personal as a spam email. Hey, we're moving in a new direction. You're replaceable. Last day was yesterday. Check will be mailed. That was it. No call, no meeting, no handshake for 2 decades of loyalty. Just a few words on a screen, and I was out. I sat there, staring at my phone, the coffee turning bitter in my mouth. Replaceable. The words stuck in my throat like a jagged pill. 20 years, half my adult life, poured into that company, and this was how it ended? I'd given him everything. Late nights, weekends, missed birthdays with my kids. I'd been the guy who showed up when the roof was leaking, literally and figuratively, and patched things up. And now I was just expendable? I wanted to text back something sharp, something that'd make him feel the sting I was feeling, but I didn't. Not yet. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that I'd been preparing for a moment like this, even if I hadn't seen it coming quite so soon. Let me back up a bit. I started working for Dan, that's his name, when I was 25, fresh out of a dead-end retail job and desperate for something stable. He had this tiny operation back then, a warehouse with a leaky roof and a handful of clients who barely paid on time. I was his third employee, hired to handle inventory, but I quickly became the jack of all trades. If a delivery truck broke down, I figured out how to fix it. If a client was pissed, I smoothed things over. When the books were a mess, I stayed up late learning accounting software to keep us afloat. Over the years, I climbed the ladder, not because I chased titles, but because I cared. By the time I hit 45, I was operations manager, overseeing a team of 30 and keeping the whole machine running. Dan's company wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving, pulling in millions a year. And I'd had a hand in every inch of that growth. Dan wasn't a bad guy, not at first. He was ambitious, sure, and a little rough around the edges, but he appreciated hard work. Back in the early days, he'd slap me on the back after a long shift and say, "Couldn't do this without you, man." Somewhere along the line, though, success changed him. The more money rolled in, the less he seemed to notice the people who'd gotten him there. He started showing up in flashy suits, driving a car that cost more than my house, and barking orders like he was some big-shot CEO instead of the guy who used to eat ramen with us in the break room. I didn't mind too much. I figured that was just what happened when you hit the big leagues. But I didn't realize how far he'd drifted until that Saturday morning text. The first few hours after the message were a blur. I told my wife Sarah over breakfast, and her face went from shock to fury in about 2 seconds flat. 20 years and he does this? Over text? That's disgusting, she said, slamming her mug down so hard coffee sloshed onto the table. My teenage daughter Mia overheard and chimed in, "That's so messed up, Dad. What a jerk." I tried to play it cool, shrugging it off like it didn't hurt. But inside I was reeling. Replaceable. The word kept echoing in my head, louder each time. I spent most of that day pacing the house, replaying every late night, every crisis I'd solved, every time I'd gone above and beyond. How could he boil all that down to one dismissive word? By Sunday, the shock was wearing off, and something else was creeping in. Anger, yeah, but also clarity. See, what Dan didn't know was that I'd been quietly building something of my own on the side. It started a few years back, almost by accident. A buddy of mine, Greg, had a small logistics business that was struggling to keep up with demand. One night over beers, he asked if I could help him streamline his routes. I'd learned a ton about logistics running Dan's operation, so I sketched out a plan on a napkin, optimized delivery schedules, better warehouse layouts, the works. It worked like a charm, and Greg's profits shot up. Word got around, and soon other small business owners were asking for my advice. I started consulting on the weekends, nothing big, just a favor here and there. But over time it grew. I'd saved up a decent chunk of cash from it, and I'd even started sketching out a business plan for my own logistics firm. I'd never pulled the trigger. Loyalty to Dan kept me tethered, but now that tether was cut. Monday morning, I didn't mope. I got to work. I called Greg and told him what happened. "That's your green light, man," he said. "You've been propping up Dan's company forever. Time to build your own." He was right. I spent the next few days digging into my savings, polishing that business plan, and reaching out to contacts I'd made over the years. Suppliers, drivers, even a few of Dan's smaller clients who'd always liked working with me better than him. Sarah jumped in too, handling the paperwork and setting up a makeshift office in our basement. Mia designed a logo on her laptop, grinning as she showed it to me. "You're gonna crush it, Dad," she said. For the first time since that text, I started to feel like maybe I wasn't replaceable, not to the people who mattered. Weeks turned into months, and my little side gig morphed into something real. I called it Cornerstone Logistics. Nothing flashy, just a name that felt solid, dependable, like me. I didn't have Dan's deep pockets or his swagger, but I had something he'd lost along the way: trust. People in the industry knew me. They knew I showed up, got the job done, and didn't screw anyone over. My first client was Greg, who signed on without hesitation. Then came a couple of Dan's old clients, guys who'd grumbled about his price hikes and his attitude. By the end of the first quarter, I had a small but steady operation, 5 employees, a leased warehouse, and a handful of contracts that kept the lights on. Meanwhile, I started hearing whispers about Dan's company. Turns out, firing me wasn't the clean break he'd hoped for. The team I'd managed for years was a mess without me. Shipments were late, clients were complaining, and morale was in the gutter. He'd brought in some hotshot replacement, a kid fresh out of business school with a fancy degree, and 0 real-world experience. It didn't take long for things to unravel. A big client, one I'd spent years keeping happy, jumped ship after a string of screw-ups. Word on the street was Dan was scrambling, cutting corners to save face, but the cracks were showing. About 6 months after that text, I ran into Dan at a local coffee shop. I was picking up a latte, feeling pretty good about a new contract I'd just landed, when he walked in. He looked rough, bags under his eyes, suit wrinkled, like he hadn't slept in days. He spotted me and froze, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, heard you're doing your own thing now," he said, voice tight. "Good for you." I nodded, keeping it civil. "Yeah, keeping busy. How about you?" He shrugged, muttered something about tough times, and bolted for the door. No apology, no real conversation, just a quick retreat. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. The truth was written all over him. He'd underestimated me, and it was costing him. A year later, Cornerstone Logistics was humming along. We weren't a giant, not yet, but we were growing, steady, sustainable, the way I liked it. I'd hired a few more people, including a couple of old co-workers who'd jumped ship from Dan's sinking operation. Sarah quit her part-time gig to manage the books full-time, and Mia was already talking about studying business in college to join the family trade. Dan's company, from what I heard, was limping along, downsized and bleeding clients. He'd overplayed his hand, and I'd found my footing. Looking back, that Saturday text was a gut punch, no doubt. It hurt like hell to be tossed aside after 20 years, reduced to replaceable by someone I'd trusted. But what Dan didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that I wasn't just some cog in his machine. I'd been building skills, connections, and grit for decades, and when he cut me loose, he handed me the push I needed to stand on my own. He thought he was replacing me, but I ended up replacing him, at least for the clients who mattered, the people who valued loyalty over flash. And that's a win I'll take any day.